The wind in Bitter Creek did not just blow, it attacked. It came racing down from the Blue Mountains like a wild animal, tearing across the dry sagebrush until it slammed into the town with a force that shook doors in their frames. Dust swirled in angry circles along the empty street, scraping paint from the wood and hope from the hearts of the people who lived there. Inside the small church, the air was still, but it felt heavy. 19-year-old Clara Vance stood near the altar, twisting her fingers into the skirt of a dress that wasn't even hers. It was too tight at the waist, too loose at the shoulders, and it smelled faintly of camphor and someone else's sweat. She kept her eyes on the floorboards, swallowing the fear that rose in her throat like smoke. She was alone in the world. Her parents were gone. The aunt she had come west to find had died before Clara ever reached her. She had no money, no home, no one to claim her. Bitter Creek was the last stop before despair. People filled the church pews, not to celebrate a wedding, but to watch it like a show. Women whispered behind their hands. Men stared with quiet judgment. To them, Clara was a stray girl, lucky to be taken in by anyone at all. The heavy doors creaked open. A gust of cold wind rushed down the aisle, sending whispers flying like startled birds. Then Silas Thorne walked in. He was late. Dust covered his long duster coat. His shoulders were broad, his steps heavy. He looked more like a man arriving to settle a debt than a groom coming to take a bride. His scarred face was hard, unreadable, shaped by years of work and war. When he reached the altar, he stopped beside Clara, towering over her like a wall. She did not look up, but she felt the strength of him, the heat of him, the weight of the life she was stepping into. The preacher began the words with no joy, no warmth, only duty. The ceremony was quick. There were no hymns, no talk of love. Only two people binding their lives together because the world outside was colder than the wind blowing through the church walls. "I do," Silas said, his voice a low rumble. Clara's breath shook. Her hands trembled so hard she thought she might faint. "I do," she whispered. There was no kiss. Silas simply nodded, set his hat back on his head, and turned toward the door. Outside, the wind whipped Clara's skirts. Silas lifted her onto the wagon seat with a touch that was careful but firm. She flinched. His hand loosened at once. He said nothing as he climbed up beside her. They rode out of town in silence. The land stretched out in all directions, empty and harsh. The sky burned orange as the sun sank behind the ridges. A lone wolf watched them from a hill before slipping away. "It is a fair ride yet," Silas said suddenly. Clara nodded, afraid her voice would break if she tried to answer. When they reached the ranch, darkness had claimed the valley. The house was sturdy but plain. No flowers, no softness. Only stone, wood, and years of lonely labor. "You go on inside," Silas said. "I will see to the horses." Clara stepped into the warm room, feeling like she was walking into another life she did not understand. The table was clean. The stove still warm. The air smelled like wood smoke and silence. When Silas returned, he cooked supper. They ate facing each other across the small table. The stew was thick and plain, and every clink of the spoon echoed in the quiet room. The weight between them grew heavier with each passing minute. The wedding night waited. When Silas finally walked her to the bedroom, Clara's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. He set the lamp on the crate beside the bed. The warm light flickered across the rough log walls, across his broad shadow, across the space where she would lie with him. "I will turn my back," he said. She undressed with shaking hands, climbed under the quilt, and pulled it up to her chin. "I am ready," she whispered. Silas lay beside her carefully, as if afraid to break something fragile. His hand touched her shoulder, a gentle touch, but it sent a wave of terror through her body. Memories she had tried to bury rose up at once. The man on the wagon trail, his weight, his breath, his hands trapping her against a tree. She curled into herself, shaking. "It hurts," she gasped, tears burning her eyes. "I am sorry, maybe tonight, or another night. I cannot." Silas froze. The shame that filled the room was thick enough to touch. He sat up slowly and put his head in his hands. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he lay back down, far to one side of the mattress, still fully clothed, and turned his back to her. "Sleep," he said quietly. Clara cried herself into exhaustion. Silas did not sleep at all. He lay awake, staring at the wall, hearing the storm of loneliness settle over them both. And outside, the wind kept howling, as if warning them that the hardest part of their story had only just begun. The next morning, Clara found the coffee warm on the stove and a short note on the table. Back at noon, Silas had left before sunrise. She stood in the quiet cabin, feeling the weight of the night settle on her like dust. The bedsheets were neat. Nothing had happened. But everything had happened. Outside, the ranch was waking. The wind carried the smell of sage and early morning cold. Clara washed her face in the basin and stepped into a day that felt too big for her. The chores were endless, hauling water from the old pump, scrubbing shirts until her knuckles burned, wrestling wet laundry onto the line while the wind snapped it like a whip. She chased a runaway sheet clear across the yard, tripping over sagebrush, her breath coming in sharp bursts. When she caught it, dust-covered and torn, she sank to her knees, staring at the wide, empty land that made her feel small and helpless. But she kept going. She stitched curtains out of old feed sacks. She mended Silas's shirts, learning the shape of his shoulders from the cloth. She planted seeds from Ohio in the hard ground, fighting for a garden the wind tried to steal from her. And Silas noticed. His eyes paused on the new curtains. His thumb brushed the neat mending on his sleeve. He didn't say much, but something in his gaze had softened. Even their conversations changed, just a little. "The coffee is good this morning," he said one day. "I crushed an eggshell in the grounds," Clara answered. "My mother said it makes it smoother." "It does," Silas replied. "A sight better than what I was making." Small steps, quiet bridges. One morning, a hen escaped the coop, and Clara chased it through the yard. When she slipped and landed in the dust, the hen crowing from atop the barn, she braced for laughter that would cut. But Silas only leaned on the fence and smiled, a deep, warm smile she had not seen before. "She is faster than she looks," he called out. Clara laughed too, sitting in the dirt, surprised at the sound coming from her own throat. But night was still a battlefield. Silas was patient, cautious, as a man breaking a wild horse. He never forced, he never raised his voice. But every time he reached for her, even gently, even slowly, her breath would falter, and her body would lock like ice. "It hurts," she whispered night after night. "I'm sorry." "Not tonight, maybe later." Silas would pull away, lying awake in the dark, fighting his own frustration. He wanted her. He wanted a family. He wanted the life he had dreamed of. But her fear wrapped around them both, choking every attempt to move forward. He remembered Martha, his first wife, and the one angry moment he had grabbed her arm. The shame of that memory poisoned him still. He vowed never to be that man again, and now Clara's terror made him feel like he was already failing. Still, he held back. He waited. He tried. Then came the day Clara overheard the town women calling her broken. Cold, unnatural. She fled the store in tears, ashamed of a body she could not control. When she told Silas she needed to see the doctor, he took her. Dr. Albright examined her with cold detachment. His hands were rough, his questions crude. His final words a blow to her already bruised spirit. "You are healthy," he said sharply. "High-strung, hysterical. Tell your husband to push through it. Once the deed is done, your nerves will settle." Clara felt stripped open, ruined. She handed Silas the doctor's note with shaking fingers and waited for him to change, waited for him to harden. Silas read the paper slowly. His jaw flexed once. Then he struck a match and burned the note right there in the dirt road. "I don't take orders from that man," he said. and I don't take what isn't freely given." Clara's eyes filled with tears. Not fear this time, but something else. Relief, gratitude, a warmth she hadn't felt in years. But the world outside did not soften. A blizzard hit the ranch 2 days later. Hail hammered the roof like rifle fire. Clara saw a calf stumble toward a drift and ran out into the storm without thinking. The wind cut her skin. Snow blinded her. The ground shook as a herd of panicked steers thundered toward her. She froze. Death was a breath away. Then Silas came out of the white storm like a force of nature. He leapt from his horse, grabbed her, and threw her under the fence rails just as the herd tore past. "You could have died," he shouted, shaking with fear, not anger. "Damn the calf! I care about you!" His voice cracked. The truth broke through. He wasn't angry at her. He was terrified of losing her. That night, wrapped in blankets beside the fire, Clara touched his shoulder and whispered, "Come to bed." Silas followed her, but fear still lived in her bones. When he touched her, carefully, her courage shattered. Panic surged, the memories rushed in, and she recoiled again. "It hurts," she cried. "I cannot." "I'm sorry." Silas broke, not in anger toward her, but toward himself, toward the whole situation. He punched the wall so hard the wood split. Clara screamed and curled into a ball. Silas froze. His bloody knuckles trembled. The horror in her eyes gutted him. He fled into the night, sick with shame. He slept in the barn for days. Clara moved like a ghost. The distance between them grew into a canyon of silence. And while they drifted apart, the wolves moved closer. Hiram Sterling, the richest man in the region, filed a challenge to their marriage. If their union wasn't complete, the ranch had no rightful heir. The land would revert to him. The threat sat on the table in a sealed envelope as the sun went down, and Clara realized in a single cold moment. Her pain was being used as a weapon. Her body was being twisted into a legal trap. Her fear was about to cost Silas everything. A spark lit inside her, a spark that had been buried beneath fear, shame, and silence. Before anything else could happen, fire lit the night sky. Someone had set their barn ablaze. The flames roared high, threatening their home, their animals, their lives. Silas saw a shadow fleeing on horseback, a man from Sterling's ranch. He raised his rifle, rage rising like wildfire. He almost pulled the trigger. Then Clara ran to him, stood on her face, tears in her eyes, and placed her hand on his arm. "Silas," she whispered, "don't let them turn you into a killer. I need you. Alive." Silas lowered the gun, and everything began to change. The morning after the fire, the smell of wet ash clung to the air. Sheriff Miller rode out early, his horse stepping through blackened mud, steam rising from the ruined barn. He studied the ground, the burnt rag, the hoofprints leading toward the ridge. "It was arson," he said. Silas didn't flinch. Sterling sent one of his men. "Maybe," the sheriff replied, "but unless someone saw a face, the court won't touch him. He's counting on you losing your temper." Clara stood on the porch, soot still clinging to her hair. For the first time, she didn't look small. She looked angry. Angry that her pain had become a weapon. Angry that her marriage was being dragged before strangers. Angry that her fear was being used to break the man who had saved her life. 3 nights later, the church filled wall to wall. Everyone from Bitter Creek came, hungry for drama. The heat was thick. The air smelled of wool and sweat and judgment. Hiram Sterling sat at the front, slick and smug in a gray suit, a Cheyenne lawyer at his side. Silas sat still as stone. Clara sat beside him, her hands folded tight in her lap. Reverend Prynne called the meeting to order. "We gather to determine whether this marriage is valid before God and the law," he said. The lawyer stood. His voice was sharp and cold. "Mr. Thorne, has this marriage been consummated? Yes or no?" The church went silent. Silas's jaw tightened. He stared at the lawyer with eyes dark enough to break stone. "That is private!" "It is not," the lawyer snapped. "If you have not bedded this woman, the marriage is void and the land returns to the bank." Clara felt the church tilt around her. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Then she stood. Gasps rippled through the room. A woman did not speak in a hearing like this. A frightened wife certainly didn't. But Clara stepped into the aisle, her dress trembling around her legs, and lifted her chin. "I will answer." Silas turned sharply. "Clara." She kept going. "My husband has not bedded me," she said. Her voice shook, but it carried, because I asked him not to. A hush fell so deep the wind outside could be heard scratching the windows. "I came here with scars you cannot see," Clara continued. "Back east, and again on the trail west, men hurt me. I learned to fear hands, to fear shadows, to fear the dark." Quote, women in the pews leaned forward, their eyes widening. I froze each time Silas touched me, not because he is cruel, not because he is weak, but because my past still claws at me when the lantern goes out. She turned to Silas, her eyes shining. "And this man you accuse of fraud, never forced me, never raised a hand, never claimed a right to my body that I could not give. He slept on the floor. He held me when I cried. He waited for me with more patience than I thought the world held." A murmur swept through the women's side of the church. Soft sounds of understanding, of recognition, of old wounds stirred. Clara faced the crowd. "You want to know if this is a marriage? It is. We are building it brick by brick. It is made of safety and trust, not shame. And that is none of your business." Sterling's smirk faltered. Before the lawyer could speak, Sheriff Miller rose from the back. "I found kerosene rags at the Thorn Barn," he said loudly, "and tracks leading towards Sterling's ranch. Maybe instead of prying into a woman's private pain, we should ask who's burning down a man's property." A shocked rustle spread across the church. Sterling shot to his feet. "This is slander." "It's evidence," Miller cut in. "And if you push this annulment, I will bring it to the judge in Cheyenne." The Reverend looked at the faces of the congregation, women nodding, men frowning at Sterling. Silas watching Clara as if he couldn't believe she stood there, fierce as a storm. "The council finds no grounds for annulment," Reverend Prynne declared. "The marriage stands." Sterling's face twisted. "This town is making a grave mistake," he spat. "This town is correcting one," the sheriff replied. Sterling stormed out of the church, his lawyer scrambling after him. Silas exhaled, a long breath he had been holding for months. Clara swayed on her feet. The world tilted. Before she fell, Silas caught her, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. "I have never been prouder of anything in my life," he whispered. She rested her forehead against his chest. "We won," she breathed. "No," he murmured into her hair. "You won." They left the church together, walking into bright sunlight, leaving behind every whisper that had ever tried to break them. The months that followed changed them both. Clara worked beside Silas rebuilding the barn, her hands growing strong and sure. She earned nods from town women who had once shunned her. A seed packet of hollyhock flowers appeared in her wagon, a peace offering. Evenings on the porch became their time, quiet moments filled with slow trust, gentle talk, and small smiles. His hand found hers easily. Her head found his shoulder without fear. Their marriage grew the way things grow in the West, through storms, through sweat, through stubborn hope. And then, as summer began to fade, Clara felt something new. A faint sickness in the mornings, a tiredness she could not explain, a flutter of warmth low in her belly. One night, by the fire, she held up a tiny white flannel shirt she had stitched by hand. Silas stared at it. Then he dropped to his knees and placed his rough hand over her stomach. "Are you sure?" he whispered. "Not yet," she said softly, "but I think we will need a cradle." Tears filled his eyes. His shoulders shook with emotion deeper than words. "We will be gentle parents," Clara whispered. "We already are," Silas answered, kissing her hands. Autumn brought the last storm of the year. Rain hammered the valley for 2 days. When it finally cleared, the sky opened into a vast stretch of night, filled with stars that shone like scattered diamonds. Clara stood on the porch, leaning back against Silas. His arms held her close, hands resting over the small life growing beneath her heart. The air was cold and clean. The land was harsh, but hers now. The fear was still a shadow, but no longer her master. "I love you, Silas," she whispered. Silas kissed her temple, his voice warm as the lamplight inside. "I love you, Clara, more than anything under these stars." They stood together, facing the endless west, a place of danger, dust, storms, and miracles. A place where a broken girl and a wounded man had learned to love each other back to life.